Evening News with Frank Reynolds.
Evening. Once again, the Soviet Union, demonstrating a colossal contempt for the opinion of mankind, has resorted to brute force to keep a satellite nation under control. Russian tanks and infantry, aided by troops from East Germany, Hungary, Poland, and Bulgaria, have occupied Czechoslovakia and have crushed the new and relatively liberal leadership of that small country. The Czech news agency said tonight that Alexander Dubček, head of the Communist Party in Czechoslovakia, and other leaders of the reform movement have been taken to an unknown place by Soviet forces. Dubček reportedly was removed in an armored car. The secretary of the party's Central Committee, according to the same news agency, has been kidnapped. The Czech parliament has unanimously demanded the release of the country's leaders and the immediate withdrawal of all the foreign troops, but the Soviet leaders obviously are not in a mood to pay any attention to demands from Prague. These films show various scenes in Prague today. Czechoslovak television was still in operation, and the films are relayed to the United States via satellite. The young people of Prague sitting down in the path of Soviet tanks, borrowing a technique employed elsewhere in protest demonstrations. The smoke here may well be from burning trucks or streetcars that in some instances were used as temporary barricades. But almost everywhere the people of Prague turned today, they found themselves looking at the barrels of Soviet guns. At least 70 tanks were reported in the capital city of Prague, and it was in Prague that casualties were heaviest. Soviet gunfire reportedly killed 4 persons in the capital. Nearly 200 were wounded. 2 more deaths occurred in Bratislava, and at least 1 in Košice. The Czech leadership called on the people not to resist violently. But these pictures make it plain that though the citizens of Czechoslovakia are unarmed, they have expressed their contempt for the invaders of their country. American embassy officials in Prague have advised Americans in Czechoslovakia to remain where they are and not attempt to travel. Soviet planes continually flew over Prague. The city's airport was closed to all but military traffic, and throughout the city, bands of people roamed about, many displaying Czech flags. Here is a crowd gathered around an automobile that reportedly was rammed by a Soviet tank. There were many incidents of Czechs and Russians trading insults, and one report says the Russian soldiers were told they were going to Czechoslovakia to liberate the country from the West Germans. Prague radio announcers, broadcasting descriptions of the scene and the streets below them, said at one point that bullets were smashing through their windows, and over their voices the sound of cannon and machine gun fire could be heard. In a choking voice, one announcer reported, "This is the last appeal. Shooting is heard from the streets outside. They are trying to scare us away, but we are used to it." And throughout the city, too, the crowds gathered. There were spontaneous rallies held. Again, smoke, possibly from a burning truck or building. But everywhere there was the overwhelming presence of the Soviet military. Just to look out a window in Prague today was to see Soviet armor and trucks moving the infantry that took up positions around the city. This is Prague, and here armored cars move into position and stop. Nobody knows when or whether they will move again. Radio Pilsen described itself today as the last free radio station in Czechoslovakia. And the announcer at the station, which is some 50 miles southwest of Prague, said a tank of unknown nationality was advancing on the radio station building. He said he did not know how long the station would be able to continue broadcasting, and a short time later, Radio Pilsen went off the air. In a moment, a report from an ABC correspondent on the Czech frontier.
Marine deck stain. Fate, coffee, sweat, tomato sauce. Guess which stain Ajax 2 won't get out. Ajax 2, the detergent so strong you can use half the bleach you usually use. Now, which stain? If you guessed the marine deck stain, you were right. Ajax 2 won't get that out. But we're working on it.
Margie, that's the ugliest tube I ever saw.
Relax. We're doing the ugly tube test.
Oh? Well, how's the test work?
Disguise the new tube of Colgate and any other leading brand. After 10 days, which one really looks used? Colgate. Give kids a choice. Most kids brush with Colgate, anti-cavity Colgate.
Compared to the leading fluoride, Colgate's unsurpassed in reducing new cavities.
Make the ugly tube test in your home with anti-cavity Colgate. That's beautiful.
West German police now say that watchtowers along the German-Czech frontier are being manned by soldiers wearing different uniforms, apparently Czech and Polish and Russian. And machine guns are pointed to the east, away from West German territory, toward Czechoslovakia. Travelers near a West German border checkpoint report seeing Russian and Polish troops, tanks, and anti-aircraft guns. ABC's Russell Jones, who was in Vienna when the invasion began, hurried to the Czech border across from Bratislava. Ironically, it was in Bratislava that the Russian and Czech leaders appeared to iron out their ideological differences in the conference that ended just 19 days ago. Here is Russ Jones' report via satellite.
That seemed to be lifting from Eastern Europe has crashed down again, crushing the budding democracy in Czechoslovakia. Here at Heinberg, across the Danube from Bratislava, only foreigners are crossing over into Austria. The Czechs and the Slovaks are held captive by the Soviets who have attacked their country. On this side, crowds of Austrians wait for word of what is happening. A Swedish tourist gives his account of events in the Slovak capital. Did you see Soviet troops there?
Yes, I see a lot of troops there.
Soviet, not Hungarian.
No, only Soviet troops.
Did you see any resistance on the part of the Czech and Slovak people?
No, I just heard some shootings.
The Czechs were shooting at the Soviets?
No, only one I saw. He was staying in the window or on the roof, I don't know. But he killed one of the Russians.
One of the Russians was killed?
I guess he was killed, I don't know.
What did the other Russians do?
Oh, they start shooting machine guns.
Are there any other demonstrations there in Bratislava?
Yes, there's a lot of demonstrations, even now.
What form? What are they doing?
Oh, they are saying, go home, Russ, and they say, dog shake. I don't know what they say.
Bratislava television broadcast what it said were thousands of messages and telegrams from workers' groups, all proclaiming loyalty to the regime of Alexander Dubček. And it said, too, that Czech writers, journalists, and artists were ordering a 2-minute general work stoppage starting at noon today to demonstrate their loyalty to the government and, in the words of Bratislava radio, to show the world our people's faith and confidence in the Dubček regime. Ostrava radio quoted Czech military commanders as being 100% loyal to Dubček and awaiting any orders from him to take action. He is not, of course, in a position to give any orders now because he's been taken away to an undisclosed place by the Soviet authorities. ABC News will broadcast a special program about the Czech situation called Again Czechoslovakia, and the program will be seen on many of these stations tonight at 8:30 Eastern, 7:30 Central Time. In a moment, the White House reaction to the Czech crisis.
Wonder what television will be like this fall? Here's some shows we think you'll enjoy. The Mod Squad.
They can get into 1,000 places if we can.
If you meet these kids in an alley some night, don't fight them. They're cops.
I know I'm not beautiful, but I'm told I have a nice personality.
She's the ugliest girl in town. She's a boy.
I mean, is that the put on to end old put on?
ABC's very unconventional coverage of both the presidential race and the Summer Olympics. That's just part of a great new schedule recommended this fall on ABC.
This crystal is clear. Clear Floorworks is crystal clear on your floors. Clear goes on clear, dries clear, stays clear. And it never yellows. Lets all the natural beauty of your floors show through brilliantly. Clear, the crystal clear look from Johnson Wax.
There's no reason why this little boy should be bothered by mosquitoes. Not with Off around. Off is the mosquito repellent that really works. And here's proof. Watch those hungry mosquitoes go for this unprotected arm. Now, foam type Off is applied. And look, they don't bite, they don't even light, thanks to the most effective repellent ingredient ever developed. It keeps mosquitoes away up to 5 full hours. Try Off in foam or spray.
An emergency meeting of the United Nations Security Council is expected to get underway soon to deal or try to deal with the crisis in Czechoslovakia. The meeting was requested by the United States and 5 other countries. Earlier today, UN Secretary General Font denounced the Soviet invasion of Czechoslovakia as a blow to world order. President Johnson promptly denounced the invasion of Czechoslovakia and appealed to the invaders to withdraw.
The tragic news from Czechoslovakia shocks the conscience of the world. The Soviet Union and its allies have invaded a defenseless country to stamp out a resurgence of ordinary human freedom. It is a sad commentary on the communist mind that a sign of liberty in Czechoslovakia is deemed a fundamental threat to the security of the Soviet system. The excuses offered by the Soviet Union are patently contrived. The Czechoslovakia government did not request its allies to intervene in its internal affairs, and no external aggression threatened Czechoslovakia. The action of the Warsaw Pact allies is in flat violation of the United Nations Charter. We are consulting urgently with others to consider what steps should be undertaken in the United Nations. Ambassador George Ball has been instructed to join with other nations in the Security Council to insist upon the charter rights of Czechoslovakia and its people. Meanwhile, in the name of mankind's hope for peace, I call on the Soviet Union and its associates to withdraw their troops from Czechoslovakia. I hope that responsible spokesmen for governments and people throughout the world will support this appeal. It is never too late for reason to prevail.
Just what role Washington is likely to play in Czechoslovakia's future has been explored by ABC's Joseph C. Harsh in Washington. Here is his view.
American policy towards the Czech crisis was shaped up rather quickly here in Washington today. The results of a series of emergency sessions at the White House and State Department can be summarized as follows. The United States is going to let the small countries take the lead in anything that is done, mostly to be in the United Nations. Washington will support everything they do, but the American role in the scenario, as written here today, is to be quiet and secondary. There will be nothing dramatic in the area of American-Russian relations. Proposals for putting those relations into a deep freeze have been turned down. For example, talks are to continue as scheduled on nuclear weapons limitations and other pending American-Russian business. There is a considerable hope here that almost universal world disapproval of what the Russians done may cause the Russians to reconsider. State Department officials have noted hopefully that the Czech National Assembly has denied the Russian case for the invasion. It is noted that the Czech foreign minister was last reported to be in Yugoslavia, which means that protests at the UN might include a protest by officials of the Czech government itself, and that many communist countries and communist parties are among those who are protesting. The assumption here is that anything Washington might do all by itself dramatically could only make it harder for the Russians to back down. The hope is that if Washington plays a secondary, quiet role, that the united voices of the small countries of the world just might impress the Russian bear. Joseph C. Harsh in Washington.
Nicolae Ceausescu, the reform-minded leader of Romania, said in Bucharest today that a guard of workers, intellectuals, and peasants will be formed for protection of our country. He obviously is concerned that the Russians might get some ideas and moving against him. Ceausescu declared that his trust in the strength of the people, adding that the grave mistake in Czechoslovakia may jeopardize peace in Europe and the future of socialism. President Tito of Yugoslavia, who has openly backed the liberal Czech leaders, expressed his deep concern over the invasion. He said the sovereignty of a socialist country has been violated and the social and progressive forces in the world given a hard blow.